I died and no one was willing to collect my body. Later, a scoundrel-looking man with a crew cut took care of my funeral affairs. He also held my ashes and lit a fire in my basement. Coward, I will take care of those who bully you. When I opened my eyes again, I was back to 10 years ago. A scoundrel-looking shamat boy blocked my way to school. Question: Nancy, you force me to do my homework every day. Do you like me? I was killed by cyber violence. I spent the last period of my life in extreme anger and depression. The internet is full of messages like Nancy, die. Today is another day of cursing Nancy. Is Nancy dead? Such comments even made me buy painkillers because of a headache. I was also mocked sarcastically by the staff at the pharmacy. Now you feel the pain. When you slap your sister or stick a needle in her body, have you ever thought that she will feel pain too? Someone threw paint on the place where I live, and there were a lot of words saying "die bitch" written on the wall. The instigator of all this was my closest family. They spared no effort to discredit me, claiming that I was an ungrateful person who could never be tamed. If I had known she was so vicious, I should not have given birth to her. My mother said to the camera with gritted teeth, "We have severed our relationship with her. From now on, whether she lives or dies has nothing to do with us," my father said with hatred. As for the younger sister who had been bullied by me for more than 10 years, she wiped her tears and cried. "Sister, I didn't tell anyone that you plagiarized. Please stop sending me WeChat messages to curse me, okay?" I looked at the family of 3 that I had blocked long ago on WeChat. I had no place to vent my anger, so I finally pulled my hair and wrote a clarification statement. But no one believed me, and my social media accounts were flooded with countless private messages of abuse and curses. None of the people who scolded me were people I knew. I was desperate and scared, and with no other options left, I called the police. But faced with such large-scale cyber violence, the police could not think of a better solution. All they can do is advise me not to go online and not to read those comments and private messages. I stay at home every day and dare not go online. Until I went downstairs to take out the trash and was stabbed by a man in a baseball cap. "Nancy, you bitch, why don't you just die?" He stabbed me multiple times. He used great force in every cut. I didn't know him, but he knew me. Every time he stabbed me, he listed my sins, called Jane's nickname over and over again, and said he wanted to vent her anger. He is a huge fan of my sister Jane. Later, someone saw us and pushed me away and ran away. I was taken to the hospital by ambulance, but I died after more than 10 days of rescue. The moment my soul floated out of my body, I felt extremely relaxed. Finally, I don't have to face those groundless accusations and insults anymore. The hospital called my parents and asked them to deal with the body. They refused, saying they had severed ties with me long ago and asked the hospital not to call them again. My soul is trapped in the morgue. The police came during this time and the murderer who killed me has been arrested. The chain of evidence is sufficient and the case has been transferred to the procuratorate. But my parents still refuse to forgive me. Even if I were dead, they wouldn't take care of my affairs. I'm actually not that sad to hear this. Because I no longer care about them. The couple who gave me life decided to believe in their little daughter. If they allow me to be cyberbullied and even threaten to cut off ties with me, they are no longer worthy of being my parents. It's just as well that they don't come to collect the bodies, so that they won't pollute the path of my reincarnation. The only thing I didn't expect was that there are people in this world who actually believe that I haven't done those things. Besides, I didn't know him at all. The person who was willing to believe me was a tall man with a shaved head. He has outstanding facial features, but there is a lot of hostility between his eyebrows. He likes to smile with a crooked mouth corner, which makes him look like a ruffian and a marginalized person in society. I don't remember ever coming into contact with a crowd like this. But he successfully got me out of the morgue with a power of attorney written by my parents. After I was cremated, he held my urn and started cursing. "It cost me more than $1,000, Nancy, you are so fucking precious. Forget it, I won't care. Anyway, you're dead. But you are so useless. When those people scold you, you can't scold back. When others accuse you of plagiarism, you dare not say a word. Fool. People on the internet say that you have been bullying your sister for a long time? I don't believe him at all. And that crappy video is clearly synthesized by AI. You have a mole on the back of your neck, I remember it very clearly. Damn, that woman's figure isn't even 1/10 as good as yours. But don't be sad, I will seek justice for you." Listening to his swearing, I couldn't help but tears up in my eyes. It turns out that he is the only one in this world who believes in me. Thank you, stranger. At first, I didn't know what he meant by seeking justice. until he came to an old house holding my urn. Looking at the familiar yard in front of me, I instinctively wanted to leave. But just as I floated 3 meters away, I was pulled back to the man by an invisible force. The man opened the yard door with ease and walked in as if he was in an empty space. To my surprise, he had a key to my house. But soon, I wasn't surprised anymore. Because he kidnapped everyone here. My former parents, sister, and boyfriend. In the basement, the man turned on the light and everyone looked over. His eyes were full of pleading. The man walked over and tore off the tape on their mouths one by one. Then put my urn on a chair in the middle. Come here and kowtow to Nancy and admit your mistakes. He hugged his shoulders, looking nonchalant. Jane was the first to come over on her knees and kowtowed 3 times to my urn. Sister, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have spread rumors that you bullied me. Can you please forgive me? I stood aside and witnessed her shamelessness once again. She actually asked an urn to forgive herself. Why didn't she kneel down and beg me? I was thinking bitterly. My ex-boyfriend Henry also knelt down. Nancy, I was wrong. I shouldn't have suspected that you were having an affair with someone else. It was this bitch who lied to me. Halfway through his speech, he suddenly pointed at Jane and started cursing. Jane naturally would not accept being scolded obediently, and she retorted sarcastically, when you were having an affair with me behind my sister's back, why didn't you say I lied to you? Don't forget, the one who slandered her for plagiarism was you. It's not you who instigated. Coward. The man with the crew cut was annoyed and kicked him away. Henry was scolded but didn't dare to talk back. The man with the crew cut pointed at the middle-aged couple and said, "It's your turn." The middle-aged woman shook her head, "There's nothing to say." "You are quite courageous." The man raised his eyebrows sarcastically, pointed at the middle-aged man and asked, "What about you?" My father lowered his head and clasped his hands tightly together. I couldn't see his expression clearly, and I didn't want to. "I've always been curious, is Nancy your biological child?" The crew-haired man asked sarcastically. I looked at him in disbelief. He still raised his eyebrows and smiled in a ruffian way with the corners of his mouth crooked, but he asked the question that had puzzled me all along. Am I the biological child of this couple? If he was my biological child, why could he be so heartless to the point of death, allowing me to be cyberbullied and thrown into the cold morgue without doing anything? How much they hate me. I saw my mother's face turn ugly in an instant. My father still had his head down, but his voice began to tremble uncontrollably. How I wished Nancy was me. Shut up. My dad was yelled at by my mom before he could finish his words. She raised her head, stared at the crew cut fiercely, and cursed, "Bastard, since the first time I saw you. I knew that you are just like your murderer father, destined to spend the rest of your life in jail." The man nodded, "You are right to curse, but my father has killed someone, and I want to do something big today." "You are crazy." I looked at him in shock. Jane and Henry were more shocked than me. After they were shocked, they begged for mercy like crazy. With tears and snot streaming down his face, he kowtowed in front of my ashes and admitted his mistake, hoping that the man with the crew cut would forgive them. It's too late. The man with the short hair took out his mobile phone, edited the surveillance video here and sent it out. After posting this video, he threw his phone away. "Jane, 8 years ago, you climbed into my bed when I was drunk and accused me of raping you. Do you know that I wanted to kill you every day I was in jail?" After he said that, he pointed at the other 3 people and said, "Haven't you always treated her as a treasure? You believe everything she says. In that case, why not just die with her?" As he said this, he walked out the door and poured 2 barrels of oil that had been prepared long ago into the basement. Mark, don't do anything stupid. I finally remembered who he is. His name is Mark. 8 years ago, when he was 18 years old, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for raping Jane. But it turns out that this was also Jane's lie. I can understand that he hates Jane, but he can't do anything stupid, he has a bright future. I can't lose the rest of my life for this bitch. Mark, stop. I screamed in despair, "It's not worth it, for this bitch, it's not worth it, stop it." But no matter how much I screamed, Mark couldn't hear me. The moment he took out the lighter, I saw my mother crawling to my urn. She cried out, "Nancy, Mom was wrong, Mom was really wrong, you must make this lunatic stop." Her words stunned me for a moment, but only for a moment. Mark lit his lighter. In the firelight, I saw him suddenly push the woman away. Then he held my urn in his arms. "Nancy, I'm not doing this for you. I fucking don't want to live anymore. A long time ago, I felt that life was so tiring. 1 life is worth 4 lives, damn, it's worth it. It's worth nothing, you idiot. Will there be a reckoning?" For the first time in my life, I really wanted to swear. Mark, you idiot. What on earth are you doing? In my life, you are not even a passerby, do you understand? You're so stupid. My empty body tried desperately to hug Mark, who was surrounded by the flames. But no matter how hard I try, it's all in vain. Before he died, he gave me back all my innocence. But I couldn't even give him a hug. At this moment, I hated myself. Bang, with an explosion, my soul was shattered by an absolute force. When I opened my eyes again, I was tightly wrapped by a hot, fresh body. Right before my eyes was a boy's face that was still childish. The boy had long, golden hair. There is a dense row of earrings on the left ear, a typical shamat style. The shadow of 10 years later can still be seen in his eyes and eyebrows. Mark. I looked at him in disbelief. Mark looked at me with complicated eyes and suddenly pulled me up from the sofa. Only then did I notice that I was in a KTV private room. The private room was packed with men and women, at least 20 people. Some of these people were wearing school uniforms, and some were wearing strange clothes, and they were obviously non-mainstream at first glance. Mark is one of the non-mainstream ones. He pulled me out of the private room, and someone in the crowd started to make a noise. Mark, why are you in such a hurry? Are you going to get a room? Mark said nothing and just pulled me out. As we reached the door, a girl in a school uniform skirt suddenly called us. Mark, you let my sister go. The familiar voice gave me goosebumps all over my body. It's Jane. Mark didn't stop, opened the door, and pushed me out. Go home, this is not the place for you. He said, and was about to close the door. I pushed the door open with force, looked past Mark and stared at Jane behind him. The long-forgotten memory was finally awakened. When Jane was a freshman in high school, she fell in love with a gangster in their school. The little gangster is uneducated and has the worst grades. He spends all day hanging out with some out-of-school teenagers in society. Jane's studies were delayed because of this, and she spent her days skipping school and hanging out with bad boys. One night, I finished my self-study class. I saw her walk into a KTV with a group of boys, and I followed them because I was worried about her safety. When they pushed open the door to the private room, a group of teenagers opened a table full of beer, sang and danced, and said they would not leave until they were drunk. Jane also drank a lot. I walked over, snatched the bottle from her hand, and wanted to take her home. But he was pushed by a boy who looked like a gangster, and laughter immediately broke out in the private room. I staggered and fell on the sofa, and as luck would have it, I fell into a boy's arms. At that time, I was so scared and the lighting in the KTV was dim that I couldn't see the other person's face clearly. Just when everyone was cheering me on to throw myself into his arms, the boy threw me out of the room with a cold face. The words he said were exactly the same as before. And Jane's attitude towards me changed from this time on. In the past, although she was not close to me, she never targeted me. But after that night, she started targeting me everywhere. Sometimes he would say nasty things to my face and then turn around and tell my parents about me. At first, I thought she was irritated by my meddling. But later, I turned a blind eye to her self-degradation, and she did not curb her behavior. Fortunately, I took the college entrance examination in advance in my second year of high school. After being admitted to her ideal university, she left home, and she had no chance to bother me again. Now that she thought about it, the poor student and gangster she liked was Mark. So, that's the real reason why she hates me. Thinking that a year later, she would still accuse Mark of raping her and send the boy she liked to jail. I just find it incredible. And this person turned out to be my blood-related sister. So disgusting. Sister, what are you looking at me like? Jane might be a little scared by my gaze. Subconsciously, he took a step back, swallowed his saliva and said, I have already said hello to my mother. I will be staying at a classmate's house today, so don't say anything when you go back. After she finished speaking, she raised the corners of her mouth and laughed again. Even if you complain, I'm not afraid. My parents won't believe you. I don't care about your business. I looked at the smug smile on her face, but my heart ached. Jane was right, no matter what I said, that couple wouldn't believe it. I don't know why, but ever since I can remember, my parents have always had 100% trust in Jane. When she was a child, Jane broke a vase and said I did it because I lost my temper. No matter how I explained, my mother just didn't believe me. She locked me in the room and asked me to reflect on myself. He also bought me a lot of moral education books and asked me to copy them. She would check it every day. She was almost abnormally strict with me, but very indulgent with Jane. I once thought that this was a manifestation of her love for me. Until she chose to believe Jane, threatened to sever the mother-daughter relationship, allowed me to be cyberbullied, and refused to collect my body. Only then did I see it clearly. What she did to me was not love at all. It's clearly hatred. I clenched my fists, tried to calm down, and slowly turned my head. Looking at the yellow-haired Mark, I asked, "Can you take me home?" As soon as I finished speaking, I heard a sigh. "The beauty is so proactive, Mark, don't be scared. Look at the school uniform, it's from number 1 middle school. Are good students also so unrestrained?" They were arguing with each other. If it were me 10 years ago, I would have been so ashamed and angry that I would have died. But at this moment, I remained calm because I just wanted to take Mark away. Since God has given me a chance to be reborn, I can't let Mark go through the same old path as in his previous life again. I want to give him a shining and hopeful life. What about not wanting to live anymore and life being so tiring? It's all bullshit. Mark was stunned. He stared at me blankly for a long time until Jane angrily pulled his arm. Mark pushed it away without a second thought. He walked to the sofa in the corner, picked up an empty school bag, threw it over his shoulder and said, "I'll take it to you." Thanks. I was about to leave when Jane grabbed me and whispered, "Sister, aren't you afraid that I will tell my parents? Are you with the son of a murderer?" After she finished speaking, the atmosphere in the private room suddenly became wrong. The crowd who were originally watching the fun suddenly stopped talking, and I subconsciously looked at Mark. Mark lowered his head, and his long bangs covered most of his face, making it difficult to see clearly. I pried Jane's hand apart and waved in Mark's direction, "I'll wait for you outside." Having said that, I left without looking back. After a while, I heard footsteps behind me, not far away. I walked slowly, thinking that Mark would catch up quickly. But he always walked behind me, keeping a distance from me. I simply stopped and waited for him. As a result, when I stopped, Mark also stopped. I turned around in confusion, only to see Mark carrying his school bag and looking at me warily. I walked over and Mark instinctively took a step back. I asked in confusion, "Are you afraid of me?" "Nancy, please don't come to this kind of place again." Instead of answering the question directly, he changed the subject. I looked at him quietly. His eyes were deep and his expression was the most serious I had ever seen. "I will listen to you and won't come here again," I said. Mark breathed a sigh of relief. "Let's go home." "Okay, let's go together." I patted his shoulder in a generous manner. His body stiffened for a moment, but soon returned to normal. When he arrived downstairs of my house, Mark stopped. "You go upstairs," he said. Under the streetlight, I looked at Mark's face and asked, "Do you still want to go back? Go back to that noisy KTV room?" The high school he attended had a very low rate of admission to higher education, and he was in his second year, the most critical year. At this time, shouldn't you be at home reading books, doing exercises, and reviewing your lessons? Why go to that kind of place? Moreover, I could sense that he didn't like that kind of environment. Mark snorted softly, looked up at me and said, "Nancy, don't bother your sister or me from now on." He paused and continued, "We are different from you." I nodded and said, "Can you come to our school to pick me up after school tomorrow?" He looked at me quietly, with a sarcastic smile on his face. Warning in a deep voice, "Nancy, I'm not someone you can mess with, understand? Mark, I will wait for you at the school gate tomorrow. No matter how late it is, I will wait until you come." I ignored his warning, said what I wanted to say, and turned and ran into the corridor. Mark's somewhat exasperated voice came from behind, "I won't go even if you wait until dawn." When I got home, my mother looked very unhappy. "Why did you come back so late?" She had a cold face, as if she was going to call him to task. Jane didn't come back either. I didn't treat her well either. In my previous life, I always thought that her control over me was out of love, so even though it was suffocating, I endured it silently. Try to make yourself better and more decent, and become her ideal daughter. Now, I no longer have any illusions, and I am unwilling to wrong myself. Jane is staying at a classmate's house tonight and she has already informed me about it. What about you? You didn't go home after self-study. Did you go out to fool around? When my mother saw me talking back, her face became even uglier and her voice became much louder. "Yes, I just went to fool around, are you satisfied?" I sneered and walked towards my room. Seeing this, my mother wanted to stop me. My father, who was kicked out of the room, stopped me and said, "It's the middle of the night, don't disturb the neighbors." My mother took a deep breath, calmed down and said, "I heard from your class teacher. Your total score in this monthly exam is 8 points lower than the last one. Nancy, you disappoint me so much. He only got 8 points less, but he's still the top student in the grade. Why are you disappointed?" I looked at her and smiled in confusion. Jane went to number 2 middle school, but I didn't see you disappointed. Can you compare with Jane? She has been more sensible and obedient than you since she was a child. She was so sensible and obedient, yet she failed to get into a key high school. I interrupted my mother before she could finish her words. You. I slammed the bedroom door. Outside the door, I heard her and my dad scolding me. They said I had evil intentions and that I looked down on others because I was a little clever. My father advised her to relax, but she said that if she hadn't been so strict, I would have been sent to a labor camp long ago. I lay in bed, covered with the quilt. The tears that had been pent up for 2 lifetimes finally flowed out. At one point, I even wanted to rush out and ask that woman. Am I her biological child? If she is my biological child, why does she always think the worst of me? Never mind. It doesn't matter anymore. Soon, I will move out and leave this home completely. Since the relationship in the previous life has been severed. In this life, I don't want to have anything to do with them anymore. The next day after school, I waited for Mark at the school gate. Wait until the self-study class is over and all the students leave school. The campus police locked the door, but I still refused to leave. Time passed by little, and I saw that the shops on the street closed one after another. As it was getting darker, Mark finally showed up. With his yellow hair, he stood out under the street lights. I rushed over excitedly. I knew you would come. Mark is cool and unruly, with a disdainful smile on his face. Ignoring his attitude, I took out a set of our school's monthly exam papers from my bag. Yes, I begged my head teacher for a long time before he gave it to me. In fact, I didn't ask for it for long, but I said it on purpose because I wanted him to cherish it. Mark took a thick stack of test papers, his face darkened. Nancy, you waited here for me late at night just to bring me this? Okay. I took out my phone and added WeChat. If you don't understand something, you can ask me at any time. He flipped a few pages and threw the paper in my face. Get out. I took the papers, sorted them out, and ran after Mark. Encourage him, don't you know how to do it? If you don't know how, I will teach you. Get away from me. Mark yelled at me. I could see that he was really angry. I really begged for it for a long time. These questions are really not difficult at all. You really don't want to give it a try? If you don't know the answer to a question, I will teach you. Mark, don't you want to go to college? Going to college will give me more choices in the future. I want to be a writer. Mark, is there anything you want to do? Can we work towards your goal together? I kept muttering to Mark all the way until he couldn't stand me anymore. He turned around and said coldly, my goal is to pick you up, will you pick me up? I looked at him in shock. To be honest, I never thought that. There is a boy whose life goal is as simple as picking me up. Seeing me stunned, he curled his lips sarcastically. Warning, good students, if you don't want to be picked up by me, don't mess with me. He turned and was about to leave, and I hurriedly grabbed him and said, go soak it. After saying that, I was so embarrassed that my face almost bled. This time it was Mark's turn to be stunned. He stared at me blankly for several seconds and squeezed out 2 words. Ill. As he said this, he was about to shake me off. I pulled harder. After you finish these questions, I'll soak you in water. I can soak you in water for the rest of your life. Damn it, the more I talk, the more shameless I become. My face was getting redder and redder, so red that I felt like it was about to catch fire. Mark looked at me in disbelief and threatened, I eat meat, not vegetables. Then add WeChat first? I said, damn it. Mark took out his cell phone and said doubtfully, am I that charming? I immediately scanned the QR code, added him as a friend, and handed him the test paper. He didn't ask me and I would check it over the weekend. Mark stuffed the test paper into his school bag impatiently and said, come on, I'll take you home. This time it was my turn to follow him with a blushing face. I don't even have the face to look at him. Mark hooked his arm around my neck unhappily and pulled me forward. Aren't you here to soak me? Don't act like I'm forcing you. You do the questions first. I shrank my neck, too embarrassed to raise my head. I was really brave just now. I just wanted to repay him for standing up for me in my previous life, but how did I get myself involved for no reason? When we arrived downstairs of my house, Mark suddenly grabbed me as I was about to go upstairs. Good student, I'll be frank with you. Since you agreed to be picked up by me, don't run away at the critical moment. I, Mark, hate those female liars who play with people's feelings the most. His words were harsh, but there was a hint of timidity in his eyes. I knew what he was afraid of, so I stood on tiptoe. I kissed him on the cheek and said, I have stamped my stamp and I will never regret it. Mark's cheeks were visibly red. There was no way to hide the embarrassment in his eyes, and in the end he could only pretend to be calm and wipe the place where I kissed. Damn, I'm so charming. After saying that, he turned and ran. I shouted at his back, don't forget to do your homework when you go back. Bang, Mark crashed directly into the streetlight. I was stunned. He got up and ran towards the gate of the community at the speed of a 100-meter sprint. Seeing him disappear in a flash, I couldn't hold back my laughter any longer. As I turned my head, my smile stopped. Jane looked at me sinisterly. Sister, why did you steal my boyfriend? Mark is not your boyfriend. I retorted with a cold face. If you don't compete with me for him, he will become my boyfriend sooner or later. Jane said angrily. I laughed out of anger when I heard her shameless remarks. In my previous life, I didn't compete with her for Mark. As a result, he was framed by her and sent to prison before he even graduated from high school. That year, I was studying in another city when I suddenly received a call from home. For the first time, my mother asked me calmly, your sister has been abused by someone, what should I do? Without thinking, I said, call the police and arrest him. When I rushed home later, Mark had already been arrested. When I heard that the person who hurt Jane was Mark, I didn't think too much about it. After all, the impression I have of Mark is still from elementary school. At that time, he was the most unsociable person in the class. Because his father is a murderer, his classmates don't want to play with him. Although I didn't reject him, I didn't try to get close to him on purpose. When Mark was in the 4th grade, his mother committed suicide because she couldn't bear the pressure. Then he transferred to another school. I thought we'd never see each other again. But I didn't expect that there would be such a missed fate. Thank God for giving me a chance to be reborn. This time, I must give him a different life. I looked at Jane's face, which was red with anger, and raised the corners of my mouth sarcastically. Stop flattering yourself, Mark told me. Even if all the women in the world died, he would not like you. You are talking nonsense. I took out my cell phone and said, I have his WeChat. If you don't believe me, I'll let him tell you in person. Jane was annoyed and hateful, staring at me with a pair of cold eyes. If I don't dare, I will go home. I smiled and said, tonight, I have a video call with Mark. After saying that, I ignored Jane's hateful look and walked past her towards the corridor. When I got home, the first thing I did was lock myself in my room. After finishing my homework, I did a set of math test papers. After living a new life, some of the knowledge I learned in high school seems a little unfamiliar. But fortunately, this knowledge is not difficult, and I have learned it before. I reviewed it a few times and finally got the hang of it. After finishing the questions, I clicked on Mark's WeChat profile picture. Quiet as a chicken. Is this guy going out to fool around again? I immediately sent him a message and asked, are you doing the questions? Yeah, Mark replied immediately. I felt relieved and continued, if you don't know, just ask. I will accompany you until 12 o'clock. Just sleep and don't disturb me while I study. Mark replied immediately, feeling very confident. I was stunned for a moment. You know, the difficulty of the questions in our school's monthly exams is almost as difficult as those in the college entrance examination. Mark, a poor student in an ordinary high school, actually knows all of them. Is he hiding his strength? After all, he had pretty good grades in elementary school. The fact that he didn't get into number 1 middle school was probably because he performed poorly in the high school entrance exam. But why did he enter number 2 middle school and pretend to be a poor student? I don't quite understand. But since he doesn't need my help, I won't bother him. I searched for Harbor Middle School on Baidu on my mobile phone and wrote down the admissions phone number of this high school. Harbor Middle School is a private high school in our local area. Although the source of students and teachers cannot be compared with number 1 middle school, the admission rate to the first-class universities and the learning atmosphere of the school are much better than number 2 middle school. It is a boarding school with military management. If Mark could transfer to Harbor Middle School, he could stay away from those gangsters in society. He will also be able to successfully complete the college entrance examination without being entangled or framed by Jane. In the best years of his life, he was charged as a rapist and imprisoned. I put the copied phone number into my math book. Just when I was thinking about whether I should do another set of physics test papers, the door was opened from the outside. Outside the door, my mother was holding the key and looking at me angrily. I curled my lips sarcastically, your dear daughter, what are you accusing me of again? Who taught you to talk to me in such a sarcastic way? My mother raised her voice very high, and I instinctively rubbed my ears. Tell me, what do you want to say? My patience is gone. Are you in love too early? She asked with a cold face and gritted teeth. Yeah, I didn't deny it. When she heard my confession, the expression on her face became almost ferocious. He suddenly pounced on me, grabbed my hair, and slapped me in the face. This was her usual method of punishment when she was irritated. I stretched out my arms to block her, and with one force I pushed her against the bookshelf. "How dare you fight back?" She looked at me incredulously. I stood up from the chair and looked at her with cold eyes. I was defending myself. As soon as I finished speaking, my dad rushed in. He helped my mother, who was sitting on the ground, up and looked at me with a complicated expression. "Nancy, your mother cares about you too." I nodded. I appreciate her concern, but I hope she can pay more attention to her little daughter in the future. In this monthly exam, she ranked last in the grade. With such a result, she definitely has no hope of getting into university. In her previous life, Jane failed to get into college and ended up attending a very poor technical college. However, at that time they blamed it all on Mark. She thought that it was Mark's injury that caused Jane to suffer mental trauma. This resulted in a poor performance in the college entrance examination, where I only scored over 200 points. "How could I raise a daughter like you who is so vicious?" My mother heard this, pointing at my nose and yelling, "Your sister is not as smart as you. But she has a simple mind, unlike you, who always do evil things." "What the hell am I doing?" I sneered and asked, "Give me an example. Tell me, why did I become vicious?" "Nancy, please stop talking." My father gave me a reproachful look. "Apologize to your mother and this matter will be over." "Can't get through." I gritted my teeth, turned around, put the books and pens on the desk into my school bag, and walked towards the door. Outside the door, Jane looked at me with a triumphant look on her face. "Where are you going?" I heard my mother's roar from behind me. "Leave you," I said. "Once you leave this house today, don't recognize me as your mother. I will just pretend that I never gave birth to a daughter like you." I paused, turned around, looked at her angry and distorted face, and nodded. I couldn't ask for more. "Nancy." My dad raised his voice unconsciously, but looked at my back and said nothing more. Jane curled her lips. "Sister, are you leaving home to find Mark?" She paused and continued, "The son of the murderer." As soon as she finished speaking, my mother rushed out. She trembled and pulled my clothes, and asked ferociously, "Are you having an affair with that murderer's son?" I reached out and tried to pry her hand apart. She pulled tight. "Answer me, won't you?" "Yes, get out." She pushed me away and opened the door. "Get out of this house. I'll treat you as dead." Good day. As I walked out of the house, I breathed a sigh of relief. Today's breakup was not in my plan. Although I have wanted to leave this home for a long time, I originally wanted to plan everything before leaving. But I really don't have the patience anymore. The hostility and control that woman had over me was so suffocating. The moment she pounced on me, I even wanted to kill her to vent my anger. This idea is too dangerous and not worth it. I looked down at my hands and thought what beautiful hands they were. In the future, I will be admitted to a top university and write best-selling works. I can't let her destroy me anymore. After leaving the community, I felt a little confused. After being in a daze for a while, I started sending messages to Mark. "If your girlfriend runs away from home, do you care?" "Sick." Another quick reply. Looking at the speed at which this message came back, it was hard to imagine that he was doing the questions. Because every time I do my homework or practice exercises, I lock my phone in the drawer. "Damn, you are kidding me." Soon, Mark sent another message. I replied, "Good students don't joke." "Where are you?" I glanced at the agricultural bank across the street and replied, "I'm at the agricultural bank opposite my community." Waiting. Mark arrived quickly. He stopped in front of me on an electric scooter wearing flip-flops and shorts. "Why aren't you wearing any clothes?" My face is a little red. The skinny boy still has some potential. Mark's face turned even redder. "I forgot. Do you want me to take you home?" he asked. I shook my head, looked at him and asked, "Can I come to your house?" Not only did Mark's face turn red, I felt his chest muscles turned red as well. This progress is too fast. "Don't you dare." I challenged him. "Get in the car." The boy threw me a helmet without any excitement. I took the helmet, put it on, and sat on the back seat of the electric scooter. "Hold on tight," Mark warned. The car was driving very fast. I hesitated for a moment, then put my arms around his waist. Under the nightlights of the city, I could clearly see that the boy's ears were so red that they seemed to be bleeding. The early autumn night was still hot, and the boy's body was terribly hot. Mark led me into an alley. Finally, we stopped in front of a dilapidated yard. Mark parked the car and kicked the door open. The yard is very small, about 10 square meters. But it was cleaned very well, and Mark kicked the door with great force, without any scruples. Do you live alone? I asked curiously. Mark locked the gate from the inside and took me into the house. The house is small, with a living room, a bedroom, and a small kitchen for cooking. The total area looks to be only about 30 square meters. When I found out he lived alone, I thought it would be a mess. When I entered the house, I found it was very clean. Mark went into the bedroom and found a t-shirt to put on. You sleep in the bedroom, he said, and walked to the sofa outside and sat down. I nodded and said, let me check my homework first. Mark was stunned, and shocked. What, didn't you write it? I'm a little disappointed. Nancy, you ran away from home, didn't you just want to check if I did my homework? I thought about it seriously, that's what it means. Mark lay on the sofa, covering his head and pretending to be dead. I walked over, sat next to him, and asked with a smile, are you still trying to seduce me? Bubble. Mark gritted his teeth. Be good and get out your homework and the test paper I gave you. You are so cruel. Mark still did his homework. But the quality is worrying, 9 out of 10 questions are wrong. The accuracy is infinitely close to that of the papers I gave. He even did every set of papers, but only wrote the multiple choice questions. I looked at him suspiciously, drawing lots? Mark's honesty makes my heart ache. What's your ranking in this monthly exam? I touched my excited heartbeat and asked. No. Mark touched his nose nonchalantly, it must be the last one. I put the test paper down, looked at him and said, Mark, I am a very serious person. Since I agreed to be your girlfriend, I will be with you for life. I paused, then continued, in the future, I will be admitted to the top 1 university in China. I will become a writer and I will be very successful. Your attitude towards studying makes me feel that you are a bit perfunctory towards both me and yourself. After saying that, I stood up from the sofa and went into the bedroom with my school bag. As soon as I entered the bedroom, I locked the door. The unfamiliar environment did not make me nervous, but made me calmer. I left in a hurry and forgot to take my pajamas. No shower either. But I don't want to move anymore, I feel so tired. Both mentally and physically. Mark's bed was washed very clean, and when he lay on it, he could faintly smell the scent of soap. I closed my eyes and slowly fell asleep. When I woke up, Mark was wearing an apron and cooking noodles in the kitchen. He saw me get up, brought the noodles to the table, and fried 2 poached eggs. I was just about to go to the table when Mark handed me a plastic bag on the sofa. I opened it and saw some daily toiletries. They are all brand new and unopened. He must have bought them at the morning market. The bathroom is outside. He pointed to the small temporary house built in the east corner. I ran over, washed my face and brushed my teeth. Then he unscrewed his newly bought bottle and wiped his face. After returning to the house, I lowered my head and silently ate the noodles and eggs he cooked, my heart pounding wildly. Mark lowered his head in silence. I finished my noodles and wanted to stand up to clean up. He suddenly grabbed my hand and asked, do you really want to be my girlfriend? Real? Going for a lifetime? He asked again. I raised my eyes and looked into his eyes, a lifetime. He snatched the dishes and chopsticks from my hands and rushed into the kitchen. When he came out again, I saw that his eyes were red. Nancy, you asked me yesterday if there was anything I wanted to do. I've thought about it, and I want to be a doctor. After he finished speaking, he paused, looked at me and asked, can the son of a murderer also be a doctor? When I saw him ask this question in a nonchalant tone, my heart suddenly ached badly. Yes. I walked over and hugged him. I trust you. After dinner, Mark carried my school bag and said he would take me to school. I nodded and said, please accompany me home at noon. He was stunned for a moment, a hint of disappointment flashed in his eyes, but he quickly returned to normal. You are a girl, so don't run away from home casually in the future. After he finished speaking, he smiled and hugged me in his arms. I lowered my voice and warned him, if you flirt with me again next time, I won't be polite to you. I stared at his cynical smile, standing on tiptoe. She kissed him on the mouth, blinked and asked, is this considered flirting with you? He gritted his teeth and tried his best to suppress his emotions. But I could still feel his frantic heartbeat and heavy breathing. Accompany me home at noon, and I'll give you the right to be rude to me. I said. Sick. He pushed me aside and ran out the door. Looking at the boy's back as he ran away in panic, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. You can't even stand this level of teasing, you're too innocent. I touched my chin and walked out the door pretending to be calm. Mark was waiting for me at the gate of the yard pushing an electric bike. Seeing me come out, He turned his face away awkwardly and handed me the helmet. I sat in the back seat and pinched his red earlobe. Remember to pick me up from school at noon. So good, I let go of his earlobe and hugged his waist. Mark stiffened for a moment, then started the car. At noon, I was waiting for Mark at the school gate. Henry came running over. He looked at me breathlessly. Nancy, I heard from Jane that you didn't go home last night. Is your aunt putting pressure on you again? I looked at him quietly. At that moment, the worry and concern on his face were so real. I once thought that he would be the person who understood me most in the world. When Jane found fault with me again and again. After being maliciously criticized and slandered by my mother. When I felt like life was meaningless and I wanted to die. It was Henry who pulled me back. He looked at me sincerely and said, Nancy. Do you want to take the college entrance examination with me next year? Let's leave here and change to a new environment. Everything will be fine. I believe he meant it when he said this. However, his sincerity was too cheap and was easily deceived by Jane. I will never forget the sight of him and Jane rolling around in bed. And those disgusting obscene words. Every time I think about it, I throw up. My cold gaze made Henry look flustered. Nancy, what's wrong with you? Stop bothering me. I said coldly. I just care about you. Henry lowered his head in grievance. I know I am not worthy of you, and I don't dare to hope that you will like me. I will be satisfied just watching you from afar. Really? I raised my lips and smiled sarcastically. Then don't be so close, step back 100 meters and look at me. You. Henry blushed. He looked at me in disbelief. What on earth had happened? There's nothing wrong, I just hate those lickers who stick to me. After I finished speaking, there was already a hint of moisture in Henry's eyes. His aggrieved look made me feel sick to my stomach. Beep beep, a shrill horn sounded at the school gate. I turned my head and saw Mark, wearing the number 2 middle school uniform, sitting on the electric bike, looking at me with a sly look. At this moment, I looked at his yellow hair and suddenly found him very pleasing to the eye. Without thinking, I ran towards him. As soon as I got in the car, Mark started the car instantly. Henry stared at us in amazement, but I gave him the middle finger. When we arrived downstairs of my house, Mark looked very bad. He is cool and cold, but I think he is becoming more and more cute. I just said a few words to Henry the dog. His expression made him look like a poor little guy who was caught cheating in bed and had to swallow his anger in silence. I took 2 steps and turned back. Won't you go up with me? Sick. He turned aside and ignored me. Later, there are a lot of things to move, and I, a girl, can't carry them, so I acted like a spoiled child. Mark finally turned his face towards me and looked at me suspiciously. I'm going to move in with you for a while. I won't beat around the bush. Mark was stunned for a moment, then came over and put his hands on my shoulders. Deep voice, Nancy, are you sick? What? Are you afraid that I will tease you? I provoked him again. This time, he didn't fall for it. Instead, he looked at me with a complicated expression and asked, aren't you afraid? What are you afraid of? I don't understand. I am the son of a murderer, he said word by word. Have you ever killed anyone? I asked. Mark was stunned. Please help me pack my things, or I will be late for class. I patted his shoulder and spoke casually. You are really sick, he said with certainty. Then take me in and don't let me harm others again. After going upstairs, I packed some clothes for changing. I also found the bank card that my grandmother gave me. Mark stood at the door, watching quietly. From last night till now, he has not asked me why I ran away from home. I don't know if he doesn't want to ask or if he actually knows everything. After packing everything, Mark went out with his suitcase. I took another plastic bag and put some of my freshman year review materials and error books in it. Mark thought these might be useful. After all this trouble, it was already 1 o'clock when we returned to Mark's yard. Our school doesn't start classes until 2 p.m., so we have plenty of time, but number 2 middle school starts at 1:30 p.m. Seeing that Mark was about to be late, I urged him to hurry up. The car is running low on battery, I'll charge it for a while, Mark said slowly. Isn't there a bus? I said. What's the hurry? Mark looked at me with a smirk on his face. We poor students missed a few classes, and no one noticed. You? His indifferent attitude makes me a little annoyed. Want dumplings? University bully. Mark plugged in the electric car and walked into the kitchen. Huh? I didn't react for a moment. You are not hungry. Mark smiled in a sly way. That's right, you girls like to lose weight. It's okay to skip a meal or two. I can't do that, I need to grow. After Mark finished speaking, he started to wash the pot and boil water. I wanted to help him, but he refused. Take this opportunity to take a shower, you stink. He turned his head away in disgust, and my face immediately turned red. I was in a hurry last night, and it was my first time staying at the opposite sex's house. Even though I have lived 2 lives, I still feel embarrassed to take a bath here. Especially no spare underwear. I blushed, ran into the room, opened the suitcase. I found a change of clothes to take with me. Walked towards the small house in the yard. The house is very simple and looks like a makeshift one. But the inside was tidy and equipped with everything, including a toilet, water heater, and wash basin. I came out of the shower. Mark just brought the dumplings to the table, crushed 2 cloves of garlic, and asked me if I wanted some. I had classes in the afternoon and was afraid of having bad breath, so I refused. Then I'll eat it, I'm not afraid of the stink. He said, raising his eyebrows at me. Childish. After dinner, Mark went to wash the dishes. My phone rang a few times. He glanced at the caller ID and walked outside to answer the call. Nancy, your mother has that kind of temper. After you left last night. I also did some ideological work for her. She said as long as you break up with the murderer's son. She could take those words back. On the phone, my father's voice was filled with deep helplessness. I lowered my head and looked at the gravel under my feet with mixed feelings. Compared to my mother's strictness and criticism towards me, Jack's attitude towards me has always been ambiguous. He would hold my mother back when she lost control of her emotions and continued to go crazy. But he never said, Nancy, this is not your fault. What he said most was, your mother is doing this for your own good, you should be grateful and understanding. Listen to your mother, admit your mistake, and this matter will be over. He has always turned a blind eye to the grievances and criticisms I have suffered. Compared to Lily's hysteria, his indifference was more suffocating. From childhood to adulthood, as far as I can remember. He never hugged me once. When I was little, I often saw him holding Jane on his shoulders. He took her to buy ice cream, toys, and beautiful princess dresses. Of course, he will prepare one for me when he comes back. But I never liked the flavors that Jane likes. Jane never wanted to share those childish toys and fancy dresses with me. She would cry and say that all the toys belonged to her alone. There can only be one princess in the family. I am just a servant beside the princess. You can't wear the same dress as her. Lily said, you are the older sister, you should give in to your younger sister. I gave in, too many times. Finally, he was abandoned in the cold morgue. When the soul first leaves the body, perception is not lost. I stood beside my own body, feeling the biting and long cold. I wonder why they have to suffer such a crime when they are already dead. What did I do wrong? I cried until my tears ran dry and asked myself this question over and over again. If Mark hadn't appeared, I don't know how long I will have to endure this torture before my soul can rest in peace. Nancy, are you listening? Jack's warm voice interrupted my painful memories. I rubbed my eyes and asked slowly, if it were Jane, would you say the same thing? What does this have to do with Jane? He raised his voice instantly, his tone revealing confusion. Never mind. I have to go to class later. Don't call me again. After saying that, I quickly hung up the phone. After taking a few deep breaths, I was about to go in and ask Mark if he had finished cleaning up, but my arm was suddenly pulled. Turning around, a middle-aged woman in her 40s winked at me. I was confused and tried to break free. She lowered her voice and asked, looking at your school uniform, are you also studying at number 1 middle school? Is this woman a psychopath? Why did she pull my clothes for no reason? My son is also from number 1 middle school. He just got in this year. His name is Frank. Do you know him? I don't know her. I pried her hands apart and stood 2 steps away from her. She came closer again in a rude manner and asked, what is your relationship with that yellow-haired guy? Yellow hair? I have to say, it looks pretty good. You are a good student, don't mess around with him, she advised kindly. He is my boyfriend, I said. The woman was stunned and said in disbelief, girl, when you are looking for a partner, you can't just look at the appearance. Did you know that his father is a murderer? It specifically kills young girls who have abnormal genes in their bodies. You are not afraid of him. Bang. Before the woman could finish her words, she was interrupted by a loud kick on the door. Mark pushed the electric bike out and glared at the woman fiercely. Threat, lock the doors and windows tonight, or I will stab your whole family to death. I was just passing by. The woman ran away with a pale face. Get in the car. Mark lowered his voice. I could clearly feel the anger in his body. I could only hold his waist tightly. Press your face against his tense back. I got off the bus at the school gate. He grabbed Mark, who was about to leave. He looked at me with some annoyance. The ruffian expression of the past. It was replaced by a feeling of tiredness. I stretched out my fingers and touched the palm of his hand. Try to calm him down. Mark, from today on, please treat me as your whole world, okay? He was stunned for a moment and took out a cigarette and a lighter from his trouser pocket. I snatched the lighter and lit it in front of him. He lowered his head and took a puff, and the smell of cigarette smoke drifted into my nose. It entered my throat and I choked a little. But I tried my best to resist the urge to cough. Looking into Mark's annoyed eyes. Stop caring about other people's opinions. You just need to remember one thing. Nancy likes Mark. Mark is loved by the whole world. I'll bring you back to life, Mark. Mark looked at me steadily and blew a beautiful smoke ring towards my face. The corners of his mouth twitched upward strangely and he asked, "Are all of you good students so shameless? We good students have many problems." As I said that, I snatched his cigarette, put it out and threw it into the trash can. Mark watched me do all this quietly, then suddenly raised his head, started the car and drove away. I watched his back as he left, and for a moment, I felt like he was crying. But I have no evidence. After school, I went to the bank and withdrew all the New Year's money that my grandmother left for me. There are more than 20,000. I kept some of it with me and gave the rest to Mark for safekeeping. During the time we lived together, part of the household expenses came from here. Mark glanced at him disdainfully. "I don't need this little money." I insisted on giving it. Mark couldn't resist, so he counted them and put them in his bag. I am an orphan and a member of a poor household, and I receive subsistence allowances and subsidies. He paused, smiled sarcastically, and asked, "How do you think I got to high school?" "Then just save it for me," I said. "If I don't withdraw the money, I'm afraid my mother will remember it one day and freeze my card." It's not that she can't do these things. In that family, my grandmother was the only person who really cared about me. I have also had many arguments with my mother because of my issues. The worst time was when she took me away from that suffocating home. She even threatened to sever the mother-daughter relationship with her daughter. They also have to raise me and send me to college. During that time, I studied very hard every day because I didn't want to disappoint my grandmother. She happily told everyone she met that her granddaughter would be able to be admitted to Tsinghua University or Peking University in the future. But when she got home, she would say to me with heartache, "It doesn't matter if Nancy can't get into Tsinghua University. Grandma is just bragging and no one will care." 2 lifetimes later, whenever I think of her, it feels like a dream. He had said with a smile in the morning that he would make me my favorite braised pork, but in the evening, he was gone. There was a sudden cerebral infarction and no one was at home, which delayed the rescue. He died before reaching the hospital. That evening, I stood at the gate of the yard and looked at the bustling crowd. Everything around me seemed far away from me, but the suffocating feeling from my neck brought me back to reality. "Tell me, did you make her angry to death? She is only in her early 60s. How could she have a cerebral infarction for no reason? It must be you who did something. It's you, you're the one who caused all this." I can't remember the details afterwards. All I know is that I returned to that suffocating home, feeling deeply guilty. I wonder if I hadn't moved in with her. She doesn't have to take care of me, doesn't have to get up so early to make breakfast for me, and doesn't have to read with me until late. Will he not die? When I thought of this, I reached out and pulled Mark's hand. There were thick calluses on his fingertips, and every time they touched me, I felt like the oxygen that sustained my life was returning. He still didn't ask anything, but just slowly held my hand back. The warmth of his fingertips makes me feel that I am truly alive. In the evening, I didn't go to self-study class. Instead, he stayed at home to supervise Mark's studies. His foundation is very poor, and it seems like he just muddled through his entire freshman year of high school. I found his first-year high school textbooks and bought some related tutoring materials online, intending to let him start from scratch. Mark is no longer as resistant as he was at the beginning, and his attitude towards learning is still very positive. He has a quick mind and can draw inferences from one instance. If you study hard in junior high school, getting into #1 middle school will not be a problem at all. I don't know what he was thinking at that time. Just wasted time like this. Mark studies very hard. 2 days later, the review materials he bought online arrived, and he began to practice questions systematically. He made rapid progress in science subjects. The only subject that is progressing slowly is English. This kind of subject that requires rote memorization and long-term accumulation cannot be rushed. We can only take it step by step. This weekend, Mark said he wanted to go to the second-hand market to buy a folding bed. He has been staying on the small sofa in the living room these days. He is over 1.8 meters tall and feels a little cramped. I'll go with you. Good. When he arrived at the second-hand market, Mark first picked out a bed, and then bought a folding table and a chair. Mark only has one desk at home. When we reviewed together before, we always sat face to face, cross-legged on the sofa. Looking at how carefully he selected tables and chairs, I felt that he had really turned over a new leaf and was studying hard. Come here and try the height. Mark grabbed me while I was in a daze and pressed me against the desk. Is the chair comfortable? He asked. I nodded. Although it was a second-hand furniture store, the thing under my butt was a brand new swivel chair. The seat cushion is very soft and the height can be adjusted at will. It's much more comfortable than the wooden chair Mark had before. After getting a positive answer, Mark went to bargain with the boss. After agreeing on the price, Mark took out his wallet to pay, but I stopped him. Said to the boss, "Give me $2 and give us another $10 off, okay?" The boss was obviously stunned for a moment, but he quickly reacted. Okay, 300 rounds up, 2. That's good enough, isn't it? Mark stepped aside and said nothing more. He looked at me with burning eyes, as if he wanted to poke a hole in my body. My face turned red for no apparent reason and he grabbed my hand. While the boss was driving the car, he pulled me into a small compartment inside. What are you doing? My heart is about to jump out of my chest. Mark's eyes were red and he glared at me fiercely. I warned you, stop fucking teasing me. Flirt with him? Did I? I felt like crying but couldn't even cry, I was so wronged. I just spent an extra $150 and bought an extra chair, so why did that attract him? I don't care, if you flirt with me, I have to take responsibility. He demanded unreasonably. I nodded like a chick pecking at rice, I'm responsible. He lowered his head, ripped open my collar, and bit my shoulder hard. He bit me pretty hard, but oddly enough, I didn't feel any pain. This was the first time I clearly felt the boy's warm tears hitting my shoulders. With suppressed sobs. This strange experience dulled my pain sensitivity. At this moment, my mind is full of thoughts. Is he crying again? I don't know why, but my nose suddenly felt sore. I stretched out my arms and wrapped them around him tightly. When I was going back, I saw a group of people with colorful clothes in the distance. Young boys and girls in strange clothes crowded at the gate of the yard. In the crowd, I saw Jane, who was dressed fairly normally, looking expressionlessly at Mark and I as we got off the electric tricycle. The boss asked very considerately, "Do you need me to help you move into the house?" Mark looked at those people and said, "Just unload it here, I will move it myself later." Great. When the boss heard that he didn't need to move the things, he got out of the car in high spirits. In less than 2 minutes, the bed, desk and 2 chairs were all unloaded. Mark, it's Ben's birthday tonight. We are going to Haicheng restaurant to celebrate for him. You can come with us. A boy with blue hair invited. Mark glanced at me instinctively. He refused and said, "I won't go, and don't call me for these things anymore." What's going on, Mark? A slightly fat square-faced boy said dissatisfiedly. You don't think you've found a girlfriend from number 1 middle school? I think I am a good student too. Don't be confused and be like those fake noble academic masters in number 1 middle school. Just have fun and don't get too serious about it. If you want to have some meat, are you afraid that you won't be able to find a pretty girl to help you when you go to Haicheng? The person who said this was a bald man wearing yellow clothes. He looked to be in his early 20s, a bit older than the others. I looked at him with a cold face as he cast his obscene eyes on me. The other hand couldn't help but squeeze Mark's palm. His fists were clenched so tightly that my fingers were numb. The bald man still smiled maliciously. How about you share with everyone tonight the feeling of being a top student? He never had the chance to say the rest. Mark kicked him hard, sending him several meters away. I was terrified. This was the first time I saw Mark so angry that he lost his mind. Beat him up for me. The bald man screamed, clutching his chest in pain. In an instant, the crowd swarmed in. Mark pushed me into a corner and pulled a folding knife from his pocket. The crowd paused, looking at each other. I guess he never expected that Mark would always carry a sharp knife with him. He stood there with cold eyes and threatened, "If you stab one to death, it will count as one. Anyway, I have a miserable life, so it's not a loss." Seeing this, the bald man was so angry that he vomited blood on the spot. You are so cruel. He is indeed the son of a murderer. If you keep talking, I'll cut off your tongue, Mark threatened coldly. The bald man shut up. He got up from the ground tremblingly, and then left with the help of a group of people. Jane was the last one to leave. Before leaving, she wanted to go forward and pull Mark back. He pushed me away and said, "Don't force me to hit a woman." Jane's eyes turned red with grievance, and she ran away covering her face. I walked forward slowly and tried to take the knife from his hand, but Mark pressed me against the gate. "Tell me you like me," he threatened. "I like you." I said every word seriously and forcefully. Mark put the knife back into his pocket. The hostility on his face disappeared completely, replaced by an indescribable grievance. He reached out and touched my face. Everything he said was a lie. What's fake? I didn't understand. I have never met those people. He added that the aggrieved look on his face was really pitiful. Which people? I still didn't understand what he said. Pretty girl. He gritted his teeth. After all this time, he just kicked someone so hard. Was it because of this? I thought he just couldn't stand that bald guy making fun of me. "I'm clean, Nancy, don't leave me." He lowered his head and buried his face in my shoulder. The tooth marks he left there not long ago still hurt. But I was too embarrassed to push him away. Because I found that he was crying again. This troubled teenager in front of me who can kick someone away with one kick is actually a little crybaby. I sighed, reached out and patted his back to calm him down. After the kicking incident, no one came to Mark to hang out for several days. But I was still worried. Because I found that Mark's emotions were easily affected. Maybe he heard some bad rumors at school recently, and sometimes he gets angry while reading. During the time we lived together, I could feel the rejection and disgust of the neighbors towards him. Sometimes a group of people would gather together and chat, but they would immediately disperse when they saw Mark appear. If a child looks at the school gate for a second longer, he or she will be pulled away by his or her parents. I have heard words like murderer and pervert many times. Although Mark remained calm, he might be sad inside. His calmness is more of a self-hypnotic numbness. I looked at the admissions phone number I had copied earlier and thought that the midterm exam was only half a month away. This midterm exam is a citywide joint exam. All the questions in high schools are the same. If Mark can get 400 points. I had the opportunity to transfer him to Harbor Middle School. I was the top scorer in the high school entrance exam that year. When the scores came out, the admissions teacher from High Gang came to our home. The condition they gave was that as long as I went, tuition, room and board are all free, and there is a scholarship of $50,000 per year. To be honest, I was very excited and dreamed of going to Harbor Middle School. But my mother, Ms. Lilly, said that I would definitely learn bad things if I went to boarding school. Let me give up this idea and go to number 1 middle school quietly. I thought that as long as I still ranked first in the city in this joint examination, I would have the confidence to negotiate with them. Because, although their admission rate to the first-tier universities was good last year, they lacked candidates with high scores. The only 7 candidates admitted by 985 universities were all repeaters, and their student records were in other schools. They need a student who is aiming for admission to Peking University or Tsinghua University to increase their visibility. I told Mark my plan. After listening to it, he said calmly, "I will go wherever the world is." I didn't think much of it when I first said it. Now that Mark said it, my face turned red. Mark is right, I am shameless. The midterm exam results are out. Mark's total score was 423, ranking in the top 10 in the class. His progress in the grade astounded all the teachers in number 2 middle school. We also held a commendation meeting and gave him an award for progress. The prizes were a pen and an English dictionary. Mark threw the prize on the coffee table. "It's so stingy, it would be better to just give me the money." I looked at his English test paper and smiled. "Your teacher hopes that you can improve your English scores." This time, he still failed the English test and only took the test on you? He asked, "Is there any hope for me to go to the harbor?" There's hope. In my previous life, I was the top scorer in the city in the midterm exam. This time is no exception. I have called their admissions department. We've made an appointment to visit the school on Saturday afternoon and we'll go together then. Okay. Mark turned and went to the kitchen. I immediately followed him in and helped him. Mark's cooking skills are average, but at least what he makes is edible. Unlike me, no matter how many times I read the recipe, I always end up cooking a terrible dish. The first time Mark ate the meal I cooked, he said he needed some mental compensation. Then he pushed me on the dining table and kissed me. He kissed me so hard that my waist turned purple. Finally, I couldn't bear the pain anymore, so I pushed him away. He wiped his mouth and said viciously, "Remember, next time you make dark food, I will break your waist." His threats were full of neurotic qualities. I gave in and visited the new school on Saturday. The principal received me personally, and I applied for a scholarship of $20,000 per year, which covered all tuition, board, and lodging. He agreed to everything. The only hesitation was that I wanted to be in the same class with Mark. He wanted to put me in a key class, but with Mark's current grades, he might not be able to keep up with the progress in the key class. He can catch up. I assured the principal that even if he can't, I will teach him. Okay. The principal did not hesitate for long. After all, Mark was just a gift. I am his hope to get into Peking University or Tsinghua University. Whether Mark can keep up is actually not that important. You can go back and find your family to handle the transfer procedures, and then you can enroll. Well, Mark is an orphan, and he can go through the procedures for transferring schools by asking the community staff. Since I was underage, I had to ask the couple to do it. Lily, there is absolutely no way you would agree to my transfer to Harbor Middle School. Ever since she threatened to break off relations with me, she has not contacted me. Only my homeroom teacher and the principal of No. 1 Middle School talked to me a few times. It seemed like Lily told them that Mark and I were in love. She said, I was having an affair with the son of a murderer. There is a high possibility that I will go astray in the future, so I asked the teachers at school to help me. Fortunately, both my head teacher and the principal believed in me. They asked me to go home and have a good conversation with her, and sit down as a family to resolve any misunderstandings. Can it be solved? I have lived 2 lives. I still don't know where her hatred for me comes from. From childhood to adulthood, what single thing has she asked me to do that I have not done well? But she never seemed satisfied. She has a deep-rooted, irreversible prejudice against me. On the way back, we passed a supermarket. Mark said he wanted to go in and buy some meat and seasonings. We pushed the shopping cart into the supermarket, and as soon as we entered, we saw Jane snuggling up to Jack. The two stood in front of the shelf choosing snacks. I instinctively wanted to move away, but Mark held my hand. Don't be afraid, we buy ours. I thought about it and decided not to run away. This is a good opportunity to ask him if he is willing to help me with the transfer procedures. Jane also saw me at this time. Sister, she called softly, raised her eyes, and said seriously, Mom is in the hospital, did you know? I was stunned for a moment. Jane continued, if you are free tomorrow, go see your mother. She is sick because of you. If I went to see her, wouldn't that make her even sicker? I was irritated. Mark took my hand and said calmly, I'll make boiled fish for you tonight. Okay. I turned around and tried to leave. Jack held me back and looked at me thoughtfully. Said, your mother is really sick this time, she has appendicitis and just had surgery yesterday. I got appendicitis because of my anger? I laughed out of anger. Nancy, why are you so cold-blooded? Jane came over. I knocked away Jack's hand and angrily accused him. For the sake of a murderer's son, are you even ignoring your own mother? No wonder she said you are an ungrateful person who can never be tamed and you won't be grateful no matter how good she treats you. Jane's voice was very loud, and soon a crowd of people gathered around her. I could feel their accusatory looks, their unspoken anger. I clenched my fists and told myself over and over again to stay calm and not get angry. But I felt dizzy and my ears were buzzing. I wanted to retort, but I couldn't say anything. In my previous life, the memory of being cyberbullied, pointed at, and abused overlaps with this moment. For a moment, I couldn't tell whether it was a dream or reality. Until Mark took my hand and ran out of the crowd. He dragged me along for a long time. The lights and shadows on the street flashed quickly before my eyes. Until it stopped in front of his gate. Nancy, you are a fool. She scolded you, but you didn't hit her. The reproach of being disappointed in my parents made me dazed for a moment. So stupid. He kicked the door open angrily. The next time she scolds you, I'm going to slap her. Beat you to death, you bitch. Mark. I shouted. He turned his head in response, and I hugged his neck and kissed him hard. I'll listen to you and slap you in the face next time. Yes, beat her to death. The next day, I still went to the hospital. Mark is right, avoiding the problem will not solve the problem. I need to say a formal farewell to that home. I took the form given to me by the school to the hospital and had Lily sign it. Lily tore it up without even looking at it. I'm not your mother, you should ask someone else to sign. She had just finished the operation and her face was still a little pale. The voice no longer had the arrogance of the past. I took out another one from my school bag. If you don't sign, I will come again. Even if you make 1,000 copies, I will not sign this. I smiled, took the stool and sat down in front of her bed. Sign this, and I will take care of you until the end of your life. I gave birth to you. If you dare not support me when you are old, I will sue you, she said confidently. I will go abroad and leave here. I looked at her and said seriously. You know, with my grades, I can apply to any university abroad. Do you know Jane's grades? She ranked third from the bottom in the midterm exam. She doesn't go home every night and lies to you that she is staying at a friend's house, but actually she goes out to hang out in a nightclub. I took out a stack of photos from my school bag and threw them in front of her. Mark bought these photos from those thugs. Each one of them shocked my cognition. Lily flipped through the photos one by one in disbelief. She screamed and threw the photo in my face. Nancy, how could you frame your sister like this? At this time, the door was opened. Jack walked in, and the photos on the floor were scattered all over the floor. He squatted down and picked them up one by one. He didn't stand up for a long time. Unlike Lily, who was out of control, he seemed very calm. Nancy, your homeroom teacher called me and said you are going to transfer schools. Well, transfer to Harbor High School, I said. He took a look at the forms and documents in my hand. I have a day off tomorrow and I will go to school and the Education Bureau. You are not allowed to go. Lily shouted angrily. Jack ignored her and walked me out of the ward. He said, Nancy, now that you are going to Harbor Middle School, don't come back to this home. Okay, after getting my assurance, Jack closed the door and returned to the ward. Jack kept his promise. The transfer procedures were completed quickly. At the same time, Mark's procedures were also completed. After this weekend, Mark and I went to boarding at the harbor. There will be a completely new environment. Mark and I will have a fresh start. There will also be a bright future. Harbor Middle School has strict regulations and does not allow students to dye or perm their hair. Mark's yellow hair was dyed back to black and shaved into a buzz cut. Without the bangs blocking his view, his facial features were handsome and clear. The hostility between his eyebrows was not so obvious, and he looked a lot more easygoing. The row of earrings on his left ear were also taken off. I touched the dense ear holes and asked him in a low voice if it hurt. When I pierce it, there is a little bit. Don't do it again, I don't like it, I said. Well, I don't like it either. Mark agreed readily. I was speechless, thinking that if you don't like it, you would still pierce so many holes and have a non-mainstream shamat hairstyle. I just wanted to fit in. Mark came over and kissed me on the face. Nancy, no one has ever been close to me before you. My heart felt empty and scared, so I just wanted to stay somewhere with many people. I don't care whether they are good or bad, I just want to have someone by my side all the time. I understand. I hugged his neck and deepened the kiss. In some ways, he and I are actually the same person. From childhood to adulthood, I have always helped my classmates, respected my teachers, and was a good student in the eyes of my teachers and classmates. In my life, I never dared to have any deviation or mistakes. I force myself to be the perfect Nancy. But I have never liked myself like this. Many times, my heart feels empty and anxious. Even though so many teachers and classmates like me, I still feel like I don't fit in. Apart from Henry, who briefly comforted me, I didn't have a single close friend around me. Many years later, I finally realized that all my efforts, they all come from the desire to be affirmed deep in my heart. That is the shadow of Lily engraved in my bones. It was Mark's fire that gave me new life. Mark and I have adapted well at Harbiside School. In the final exam of the first semester of his senior year, Mark scored 568 points in total. This score already provides some room for selection in some medical schools. But Mark felt that was not enough. He works much harder than I do. The boys in his dormitory often describe him as a devil. I know he wants to be admitted to the same city as me. I entered the harbor and signed the bed agreement. Peking University and Tsinghua University is my only goal. In my previous life, I took the college entrance examination in my second year of high school and ranked 56th in the province in science. With this ranking, even if you are admitted, your choice of major will be relatively passive. So, I chose a top major in a 985 university in the south. This time, I plan to fight with Mark until the last moment of senior year. Go and fight for the most perfect future. Mark and I spent the winter vacation until the end of the year before leaving school. Mark's small yard had been uninhabited for a long time and was covered with a thick layer of dust. I took a broom and started cleaning while Mark went to the supermarket to buy New Year's goods. When he came back, he was carrying a lot of bags. When I was sorting, I saw 2 pairs of Spring Festival couplets and 5 blessing characters. On New Year's Eve, Mark pasted the word "foo" on every door. Firecrackers are not allowed in the city, so Mark bought some fireworks and set them off in the yard. In the firelight, we saw the best of ourselves in each other's eyes. The morning of the first day of the new year, I was awakened by the ringing of the telephone. Lily called. On the phone, she cried and said that something had happened to Jane. When I heard the news, I instinctively went to find Mark in my slippers. Mark was wearing a cotton coat and cooking dumplings in the kitchen. When he saw me naked, he ran out. He scolded, "School is about to start in a few days. What will you do if you catch a cold?" The moment I saw Mark, I finally felt relieved. "Call the police and arrest them," I said to Lily, who was already panicking. After hanging up the phone, I was a little dazed. In the previous life, Jane had an accident when Mark was in his third year of high school. At that time, there were only 3 days left before the college entrance examination and the school had already been closed for holiday. Mark was taken away by the police before he even entered the examination room. I changed my clothes and sat at the dining table, while waiting for Mark's dumplings. While thinking about this time in my previous life, what happened? At that time, Jane often stayed out all night. I don't care. On New Year's Eve that year, she went out after eating the New Year's Eve dinner. Then come back the next morning. His hair was disheveled and he looked very disheveled, but he was in a good mood. On the first day of the new year, she stayed at home all day, dancing in the room with the speakers turned up very loud. I was annoyed by the noise and went to knock on her door. It was rare that she didn't oppose me and said with a smile, "Nancy, my spring has come." I cursed him and went back to my room. Jane's abnormality and good mood only lasted 3 days. 3 days later, she turned back into the selfish, willful and vicious Jane. And it's getting more and more excessive, so I took the college entrance examination early to stay away from her deliberate targeting. What happened on New Year's Eve in the previous life? Also, how could she be? I was lost in thought when Mark brought the dumplings to the table. "Eat quickly, or it will get cold," he said, and took one for himself. I didn't pick up my chopsticks, but looked at Mark and asked, "Were you familiar with Jane before?" "Not very familiar." Mark looked at me and said with some hurt, "You don't think I have that kind of feelings towards her, do you?" Huh? Seeing that he misunderstood, I immediately explained. "I didn't mean that. I just thought she liked you very much and thought you two should have a good relationship. I don't mean that to her." Mark took a bite of the dumpling and said, "She played like crazy in number 2 middle school and didn't respect herself at all. Many boys wanted to have sex with her, but I couldn't stand it, so I saved her a few times." Is that so? If so, perhaps that would explain it. Why on New Year's Eve in her previous life, Jane was in good mood and nothing happened? Because Mark saved her at all costs. That's why she was safe and sound. She thought Mark saved her because he loved her, but later found out that was not the case. That's why she hates me so much. Hate Mark so much that I am willing to destroy his life. Thinking of this, my hands began to tremble uncontrollably. If in this life, Mark and I didn't live together and go to harbor school together. Will it? I dare not think about it anymore. When Mark saw me lowering my head, he explained awkwardly, "I saved her because she is your sister." "I know." I looked up at him and asked casually, "Mark, have you liked me since you were very young? Don't be so narcissistic. It was obviously you who liked me first." Mark snatched the dumplings from my bowl in annoyance. "I liked you first, because my Mark is so arrogant and crybaby." I looked at him and grinned foolishly. "If you don't eat it, I'll fall down." Mark stared at me in shame and anger. "If you feed me, I will eat." Over the next 2 days, Lily called several more times. She wanted me to go to the hospital to see Jane and comfort her. I refused. It's not that I'm cold-blooded, but if I went, the situation would only get worse. Moreover, thinking about how she treated Mark, who saved her more than once in her past life, my stomach was starting to feel nauseous. The school will start classes on the 6th day of the new year. Mark and I plan to take advantage of these few days to relax, go shopping, and watch a movie. Once you go to school, you have to devote yourself to studying. What I didn't expect was that I didn't go find Jane. Jane came to me on her own initiative. She was wearing a hospital gown under her down jacket and squatting at the gate of Mark's yard. Mark chased her away, but she remained indifferent. She stared at me intently, as if I had ordered those people who hurt her on New Year's Eve. I took out my cell phone and called Lily to tell her Jane was here. After hanging up the phone, Jane looked at me and suddenly grinned. "Sister, do you know why Mom hates you? I have already notified her to pick you up." I forced myself to calm down and not let her affect my emotions. She hates you because your biological father is a liar. All these years, have you never wondered why your dad never hugged you or was close to you? Because you are not his biological daughter at all. I am his only daughter. Your mother was defrauded of everything by your father and is now in debt. He was desperate and wanted to commit suicide but was saved by my father and survived. Nancy, you have nothing to be proud of. You are just the daughter of a swindler. After saying that, he looked at Mark again and laughed crazily. A murderer and a swindler, damn, a perfect match. Pa. I raised my hand and slapped him hard in the face. She was stunned, and I slapped her again. Are you crazy enough? If you've had enough, just go away. Nancy, if you dare to hit me, I will fight you. Just as she was about to pounce on him, Mark grabbed her by the collar, lifted her up, and threw her out forcefully. I will fight you. Jane got up and wanted to make trouble again. At this time Jack and Lily arrived. They pushed her to the ground and tied her hands and feet with ropes they had brought with them. I stood there, looking coldly at everything in front of me. Lily controlled Jane and looked at me from a distance, wanting to say something but stopping herself. She is like this. Have you taken her to see a doctor? I'll go when she's feeling better. For the first time, she didn't act arrogant in front of me, and her voice was full of fatigue. Jane said, my biological father is a fraudster, is this true? I asked again. Lily lowered her head and clasped her hands together. She didn't say it, but I already knew the answer. Can you tell me his name? His name is David and he was sentenced to life imprisonment. Life sentence? The amount of fraud must be huge. So this is why she hates me. Because I am the daughter of a scammer and I have the genes of a scammer in my body. That's why she kept saying that if she didn't care about me, I would become bad and go to a labor camp. So, that's what it meant. If I were you, I would not give birth to her. Nancy, Lily raised her head, her eyes full of tears. Go back, I waved my hand. I promise to take care of you in your old age and I will not go back on my word. I turned around and found that Mark had opened the gate without me noticing. When I got home, I locked myself in my bedroom. I feel empty inside and think this world is crazy. A woman gave birth to a daughter of a fraudster. Then I hated her for 17 years. Isn't this sick? Why not just knock it down? Why let her be born? Do you think you are great? Damn great. Nancy. Mark knocked on the door and said, since you are so sad, I have a secret to share with you. What a secret. I opened the door, not expecting much, but I wanted to see him. Whenever I feel suffocated or irritated, I calm down when I see Mark. Mark curled his lips and chuckled. I have liked you for a long time. What kind of secret is this? I already knew it. He looked at me with sparkling eyes. I like you because you are Nancy. I like it so much that I do my homework, memorize words, and practice exercises until 2 in the morning every day, and I still feel happy. Even if you asked me to die now, I would do it without hesitation. You will never find someone in the whole world who loves you as much as I do. Your mother, sister, and adoptive father, they can never love you 1/10,000th as much as I do. This is my secret, I give it to you, and my life to you. Mark, looking at his affectionate eyes, I was choked with sobs and speechless. He reached out and touched my head. Good student, you now own the whole world, do you know that? 1 summer later. The college entrance examination scores are out. Not surprisingly, I made it into the top 10 in the province. Harbor High School gave it a big publicity, and my name and picture were put on the school's honor roll. Mark was admitted to a medical university in Beijing. Jane became mentally ill due to the accident and dropped out of number 2 middle school. After that day, neither Lily nor Jack contacted me again. At the end of summer, Mark and I went to Beijing and started a new life. Postscript. Mark was in his 3rd year of graduate school. Suddenly I received a phone call. The man on the phone said that the police had recently cracked a serial murder case. The murderer committed crimes across regions over a period of 30 years. During interrogation, he confessed to a murder in Jiangcheng. The victim's information is highly consistent with the victim in the case involving Mark's father. Mark hung up the phone and ran home frantically. He hugged me as I was sitting in front of the computer revising the manuscript. Nancy, That day, Mark hugged me and cried like a baby. Cry from the sunset to the moonrise. After 25 years of accumulated grievances. When he learned that his father might be innocent. Completely released. Later, there was a breakthrough in the case, and the unjust, false and wrong case from 25 years ago was corrected. The lawyer who was in charge of Mark's father's case asked him whether he wanted to apply for compensation from the state. Mark refused. He said that God has given him the best in the world he owns. My world is a mess. My name is Mark. The label of being the son of a murderer has been with me for as long as I can remember. I hate my father. I hate that he is so perverted that he kills people. But I hate my mother even more. She gave birth to me despite everyone's opposition. She said your father was wrongly accused. Mark, you need to seek justice for your father. She kept appealing and seeking justice like a madman. Offended everyone around me. In the end, Sherpingyuan was sentenced to death. The day of the execution was a very ordinary day. My mother put on her makeup early and said she was going to see him off for the last time. The way she looked that day scared me. But I didn't think much about it and went to school. In the afternoon, my head teacher pulled me home while I was still in math class. There are many cars parked outside the gate. A lot of people gathered there too. I saw a stretcher covered with a white sheet being carried out. I can't remember a lot of things that happened afterwards. My uncle took me back to live with him for a while. Those days were a chaotic time. My aunt watched me like a thief every day. If my cousin talks to me for a few more words, she will be frightened and pull away. Don't play with him, his blood is cold. Like his murderous father. Even when his own mother died, he never shed a tear. I heard people talking about me like this behind my back. I want to cry, but I can't. I felt like my tear glands had failed at that moment. Then, I was isolated from the whole world. No matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't fit in. Like an outsider, living on the edge of this world, everything is numb. The only person who makes me feel alive is Nancy. Nancy is excellent. Always get first place in exams. The teachers like it and so do the classmates. She has many, many friends, and when I was very young, I envied her. How can one person be liked by so many people? I always can't help but turn my eyes to her. She is like a little sun, warming everyone. She is also the only girl in the class who dares to talk to me. When she knew that I hadn't done my homework, she would ask me if I was sick or where I felt uncomfortable. A classmate in my class lost his pencil, and everyone suspected that I stole it. She would stand up and say, "Mark wouldn't steal anything, let's look for it more carefully." Later, the pencil was found in the trash can. When I told Nancy this, she looked at me in confusion and said she didn't remember a single thing. He also asked me if I remembered it wrongly. I said, I couldn't have remembered it wrong. Because, those who stand in darkness all year round. As long as a little light shines in, those bright moments will be engraved into your bones. I still remember that one time I was assigned to do duty with her. She finished her part and came over to help me. Later we left the campus together. When her mother saw me coming out with her, she looked unhappy. "Stay away from that murderer, son." Her voice was stern and I was a little scared. "Mom, he is my classmate, not the son of a murderer." Nancy explained innocently. "His father has killed someone, don't learn bad things from him." The woman scolded impatiently. "That was the person his father killed, he didn't kill him." Nancy tried to argue but was slapped in the face. Quibbling, "How could I give birth to a daughter like you who can't tell right from wrong?" I stood there in a daze, watching their backs getting farther and farther away. My eyes hurt so much that I wanted to cry. It turns out that my son has not been well cared for. Her mother doesn't seem to like her that much. At that moment, my tear ducts began to function again. Later, my uncle helped me to transfer schools because his son was also going to elementary school. My aunt was afraid that my presence would cause her son to be ostracized at school. After all, I have the blood of a murderer flowing in my veins, and his son is related to me by blood. So I was sent away. I will never see my son again. I really want to cry, but my tear glands won't produce any tears. My tear glands only function normally when I see Nancy. So, I spied on everything about Nancy like a pervert. She was as outstanding as ever, ranked first in the city's high school entrance examination, and was admitted to number 1 middle school. And I, because of my own indulgence, could only go to number 2 middle school. I met Jane in number 2 middle school. Jane and Nancy are nothing alike. She loves to play. There is a lot of trash in this trashy school, number 2 middle school. Many people start to hang out in society since their first year of high school. I'm afraid something might happen to her and Nancy will be sad. I always protected her silently, and later, she fell in love with me. I feel very annoyed. Because I never thought about falling in love. Even with Nancy, I never thought about being with her. I just want to watch her from a distance. Watching her become more and more outstanding is the only joy in my life. So, when she showed up in the room, I just wanted her to leave. The filthy atmosphere here doesn't suit her. She deserves better. She asked me to take her home, and I agreed because I was afraid it would be unsafe for her to walk alone at night. As a result, she became more demanding and asked me to pick her up from school the next day. How is that possible? She is just my son. I can only watch her from a distance. If I get too close, I will get hurt. But I went anyway. Because she had waited too long. Someone threw paint on the place where I live, and there were a lot of words saying "Die bitch" written on the wall. I want to get her home safely. She gave me the test papers from their school, said she wanted to teach me, and asked me what my life goals were. I am very annoyed. What purpose does a murderer's son have in life? In order to scare her away, I deliberately said that my life goal was to seduce her. This time, she will probably be scared away by me. I thought proudly. As a result, not only did she not run away, she also promised me a world. It turns out that she is not my son, but my new world.